Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Attack on Titan anime review. This one is going to be for the final season, episode 1, The Other Side of the Ocean. So yes, we're into the final season of Attack on Titan. I don't follow the manga myself, I am anime only with Attack on Titan, but I do know that the manga is like right towards the end, and I think is due to finish up within the next couple of chapters. So by the time we're getting towards the end of the anime, the manga will, I suppose, be well done and they'll have all the material to adapt. So I think we're in a pretty good position, even though when it was first announced that the anime was going into its final season, it didn't feel like, I think people were saying it didn't feel like it was that close towards the end. But, by the time we get there, it should all be done and dusted. So yeah, this was a very interesting opener, because I think it's purposefully meant to leave you a little bit confused by not focusing on any of our main characters, in that it takes them quite a while to properly introduce characters who we even know at all in Reiner and Zeke. And then every one of the other characters is pretty much new, because we're focusing on the Marley side of things. And it's our first real look at the Marley side of things sort of in the present, even though I suppose retroactively we now realize that everything from like Reiner, Berthold and Annie's perspective was now ultimately Marley's side of things. And here's more of the context for that we get through the characters of Gabi here, Falco, and some of the others. Just seeing how Marley runs their military and the position that they're in outside of their attempts to attack Paradise Island to get some of the other Titans back. So that was probably the main confusion that I had for a lot of this episode, was just trying to figure that all out, and that it's still sort of new to just have that reveal of like, oh yeah, the entirety of like the first 3 seasons just took place on a tiny island. The whole rest of the world is up to a whole lot else. And so what we learned here was that, of course, Marley is fighting a war with other nations on the main landmass of the world. We find out right at the end here that the people they're fighting in this episode is the Mid-East Allied forces, and they defeat them and then form a peace treaty with them, and I suppose regain some footing there, regain some territory, and shut down a threat that they had. And they established this pretty interesting dynamic here of that Marley have control of so much of the world because they possess the power of a lot of the 9 Titans. But, as is explained within the episode, they're sort of a little bit more at risk. The reason that this sort of allied force rises up against them is because they lost the Colossal Titan and the female Titan in their quest to try and get some of the other Titans. So it's seen that they're kind of in a weaker position, having less and less of the Titans. And it is a very interesting position for Marley to basically pretty much rely on the Titans as the core of their military strength, which means they have to use the people that they hate so much as the sort of front lines of their military. So, it speaks to this idea that if they can't control the Eldian people under their control, they don't have the ability to sort of, control the main powers, because they get across this idea that Marley isn't as well off on the technology side of things as some of the other nations are, in that they establish here that, of course, the Titans are extremely powerful, especially the 9, but the enemy are now capable of making cannons that can basically, one-hit kill Titans, including the 9 Titans. And as we see here, even Reiner, the armored Titan, is at risk from these 150mm cannons. So that's a major kind of technological advancement that, they had to come up with a pretty extreme tactic in this episode to get the win here, to shut down this sort of fortress and gain control, defeat their forces at sea, and I suppose now go on to maybe go after Paradise again. But that was really cool, that just the whole episode was a sort of military sequence here on the Marley side of things. It of course was interesting for it to not feature Eren, Mikasa, Armin like at all, and it looks like introducing Jean John, however exactly you pronounce his name, right at the end was about the best we got with that, highlighting that it looks like the Scouting Legion has done some stealth and has kind of made their way into Marley to figure out what's going on. So I guess some sort of an attack from their point of view is coming to take them by surprise, which could be very, very interesting, especially with like the kind of position that Eren found himself in, of not being like extremely happy about finding the ocean and just more realizing that, oh, everyone sort of hates us and it's just this awful situation that they're in, and it's going to be more war, more pain, that they have to fight this hard just to realize they're out on an island on their own, and they exist because people hate Eldians fundamentally. And you saw a lot of that in this episode with how Marley used the Eldians, of like, they have this whole warrior system where they choose skilled Eldian kids to like basically have people capable of gaining the power of the 9 titans that they still have. In that the main group that we meet here with like Gabi, Falco and so on, they're candidates to gain the armored titan, because of course we know that the curse of titan shifters is that they can only live 13 years after gaining their titan abilities. So I don't think we're quite up against that for, I think, any of our sort of, you know, young characters necessarily, but they obviously have to have people ready, years of training, ready to take on the role if anything did happen to Reiner. So, you know, it makes sense. He's still got time, even though we've had a bit of a time skip, but there's a bunch of people waiting in the wings. And that's really, really interesting, in that this clarifies to us, I suppose, why these 3 kids, like Annie, Berthold, and Reiner, had the, you know, Titan shifting abilities in the first place, because they were Eldians, you know, raised to be warriors for Marley and raised to hate Eldians. And you see that I think through, like, you know, obviously the Marley army and just the whole lies about the past. Like, obviously we still don't know, I think, a lot about the full details on that, in that it links into a lot of the lore about like the king who had the founding Titan powers, and the fact that the people who have the founding Titan power, if they're also part of the bloodline, are incapable of like making choices that go against the sort of, you know, that king's initial want for Eldians to be sort of, you know, pacifists again, that they still should suffer for the sins of what they did in the past, which I guess is when they had the control of all 9 titans. They, you know, how they dominated the world was by committing a lot of atrocities, and obviously this led to a situation where Marley rose up and they gained control of the titans, most of them, to do what they did. And again, a lot of that I suppose probably needs to be a little bit more heavily explained to give us full context, in that, like, Eren, I suppose, is going to be fueled by what he's learned about Eldia and Marley based on the flashback, and that's going to have to be delved into a whole lot more, because I suppose we're pretty convinced at this point that, like, okay, the whole military on Paradise Island, the Scouting Legions, everyone is now going to kind of realize the full scope of what they're dealing with, and are going to have to choose a side or whatever in the war. And that's kind of the big interesting thing here, is like when we get introduced to like Levi and everyone, like, what is the aim now that they know they're just an island? How are they hoping to potentially like defeat Marley or whatever? Because again, like, it gets into the whole idea of like the reason they live behind walls, and that whole situation is like kind of part Marley, part the, you know, old king's fault or whatever. It's pretty complicated, but I suppose we'll delve into it quite a bit, because what they did here with this episode was introduce, I suppose, two focused on characters here, young characters on the Marley side of things, Gabi and Falco. Gabi seems like the one who's in the prime position to inherit the Armored Titan powers from Reiner. She just seems like, you know, they talk about how she has the best grades. We see she's willing to put herself on the line, and, you know, but she also seems to care quite a bit about defending the other people of Eldia, especially the ones who are in the military on the Marley side of things. She still is sort of brainwashed by them to believe that all the Eldians on Paradise Island are the, you know, quote-unquote devils of the world. But I suppose that's the growth she's going to have to go through as she probably interacts with the Paradise Island characters as they come into play. Now that we have the context and can have the people from the mainland interact more heavily with the people from the island. Falco was kind of interesting in that, you know, he seems to suffer like concussion or something like that in the middle of the battle, and he's like doesn't really remember what's going on. It seems like he's just sort of making stuff up, but it also is sort of reminiscent of like Eren from episode 1. What was the guy's name? Kruger from the flashback as well. The big, you know, twist moment that everyone freaked out about. It was just like, how does this guy know about like Armin and Mikasa? Like, that's like a kind of time travel type thing. Like Eren as well, sort of talking about stuff that kind of hasn't happened yet. And then this guy who's a Marleyan clearly referencing like 3D maneuver gear, even though he's probably never seen it before. Which my interpretation of that is that I guess at some point Falco becomes a Titan shifter, and through sort of time stuff, that's why he has sort of connections to either like the past or future, depending on what Titan he actually gets, because obviously quite a few of them were in the Survey Corps or whatever, were in the military and have used maneuver gear. So I guess that's one of those things. I still don't quite get the full details on that if it's every person who has the one of the 9 Titans is kind of has that connection, or if it's just the Attack Titan or Founding Titan. Again, there's a lot of clarification that needs to happen here, but it seems like, okay, that's potentially one of the positions that Falco's going to have to be put in, even though he maybe doesn't seem as good as Gabi in that sense. But, you know, we see he cares for her, she puts herself on the line, surrendering, taking out the rail on her own to sort of open the path. And then the main sort of climax of this action set piece is the attack on the fortress, which is pretty brutal in the way that it's done, because they attack from an airship and they drop a lot of I guess it's just Eldian people out, and then the Beast Titan activates his powers to turn them into Titans mid-flight. So they're basically just acting as, like you said, sort of a kinetic bombardment here of just giants dropping out of the sky onto the fortress is going to cause a lot of this disruption. Reiner then comes down, transforms Armored Titan right in the middle of the fortress, and then right at the end, Zeke comes down and he basically takes all the, I guess it's the ammo from the guns, and just fires them out at the boats out at sea to take out all the ships. And obviously they're a little bit taken by surprise by the full attack from the sea, but they ultimately win the day. But they get quite a shock at the level of technology that's kind of coming back at them. And that's the kind of main thing of like only having a couple of Titan shifters now instead of most of the 9 puts them at a bit of a disadvantage, especially when they really don't seem to have the technology otherwise. And again, it doesn't look like the Marley military itself is particularly strong. Like, if they lost all of the Titans, like, do they have anything in a way? Is the big question here. So like, how did that happen? Like, who who were the people of Marley, like, before all this Titan stuff kind of happened and they gained control of it? It just, there's a bunch of questions that I don't know if we're going to get answered or how much of a focus it's going to be. But, you know, kind of weird, confusing opening, but also a really good episode. Now, we also have a new animation studio. I think it's Mappa who are animating now instead of Studio Wit. I thought it held up really well. I didn't notice any like drop particularly. Maybe I didn't focus too much on the animation because I was so like, whoa, what's going on here? But so far so good in my opinion. And you know, this is only the intro. I suppose there's huge moments as we go through this final season that, you know, again, like any anime, there'll be episodes where they have the high quality animators on it. There'll be episodes where they don't need that, and it'll go up and down. But so far, the quality seems quite good. But I think that's pretty much everything I want to say about this one. I suppose in the comments, let me know if you have any questions or thoughts about what I had to say about the episode here. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.